I would very much like to welcome you all to this press conference on the occasion of the exhibition Alexander Girard, A Designer's Universe. I was just saying to our German friends that we have a lot of guests from the United States and from other countries here today, so that's why we are holding the press conference in English. And there will also be a guided tour in English that starts right after this press conference at 3 o'clock in the museum. I would like to welcome two guests that are here with me on the podium. It's Alexia Girard and Cory Girard, who are both the grandchildren of Alexander Girard, and we're really happy to have you here. Thank you.
Thank you.
With them is also here, not here at the press conference, but he will be with us tonight, their father, Marshall Girard, and his wife, Alexis, and we're really happy to have so many members of the Girard family here, and I think that will give the opening of the exhibition really a very personal and special touch. And Alexia and Cory will also say a few words later about their view of Girard's work and about the exhibition. Also on the podium is Jochen Eisenbrand, chief curator of the Visual Design Museum. He curated the Girard exhibition, and he will say a few words about the concept in a minute. The exhibition we're opening today is about a personality of design history that is maybe not among the most famous protagonists of design, maybe not yet. But I think nearly all of you have already seen works of Alexander Girard, either of his textiles, of patterns that he designed, or things like the famous love heart icon that went all around the world. So there's a lot of work of Girard around that you might not associate with Girard. And in fact, Girard was a true universalist. He worked in many different areas. He designed interiors, he designed furniture, he designed glamorous restaurants. He worked as a businessman, as a curator, even as an entrepreneur. So he was not specializing on one discipline, but really working for a lot of different clients. Also different companies like Herman Miller, like John Deere, like Braniff, but also museums, public institutions. And the really special thing about Girard is that he brought pattern, color, ornament back into design in the second half of the 20th century. If we look back at the first half of the 20th century, you all know that design was mainly seen as something that has to do with reduction, with minimalism, with an aesthetics that had to be adapted to industrial production. And when Girard started to become more known in the post-war years, first in the United States, he did all the contrary. He started to show that design also has to do with joy, with passion, with colors, that it can celebrate everyday life, that it is really about a certain pathos of the everyday that he introduced in all the works that he did. And this becomes most visible in Girard's interior designs because there are few other interior designers in the 20th century that have focused so much on their disciplines and that have shown that the interior is really where the different disciplines come together. The architecture, art, design, where the collectible, the private object comes together with furniture that you buy from a shop. And the 20th century in general was a century where the interior design was seen as a minor art. Somehow it became forgotten between the designer and the architect. And if in the future, what we very much hope, the design of interiors will be seen as something really relevant and crucial again, we are sure that Girard will be an important point of reference for this. So why was Girard able to do this? And why was he able to infuse this new energy, this new joy into design? I think he was able to do so because he connected things. He connected people, he connected ideas, he connected objects. And while a lot of modernist designers were rather interested in specializing on different areas, Girard was a universalist that connected crafts and industry, folk art and pop art, high culture and low culture. So it was really this potential of synthesizing different opposites that allowed him to find a new aesthetic that became so influential. with this sense of connecting, he became a kind of postmodernist avant la lettre. He was one of the first who introduced an aesthetic that later in postmodernism became more common, but never again reached in that level of sophistication. But I think his influence also goes beyond these periods of modernism and postmodernism, because even if today we discussed about the globalization of design, about a global visual language, about post-industrial society where crafts and industry are meeting in new ways, we can see Girard as somebody who has anticipated a lot of these ideas that we're discussing today. Alexander Girard died in 1993, and it was 3 years later that his private estate was donated to the Vitra Design Museum. And since the Girard archive came to the Vitra Design Museum, it has taken us a while to explore and inventorize this treasure, I have to admit. But now today, finally, we are opening this exhibition that we have thought about for such a long time. We are publishing a beautiful catalog with the exhibition. I would rather call it quite an autonomous book. It's not only an exhibition catalog. And we are really happy that with this project we were able to communicate this archive that we have received in the 1990s now to a larger audience, and it is our will to make this archive from now on finally completely accessible to any scholar, journalist, or other people that are interested to do research about Girard. So we do not see the exhibition as a finishing point, but rather as a starting point to bring the legacy of Girard out into the world. For making all this possible, I would above all like to thank the Girard family members for having trusted us so much. I would really like to thank Aleshel and Corey for this, and also your father, who will be here tonight, because already by donating the archive to the Vitra Design Museum, of course, you have showed great trust in our capability of keeping this archive in good conditions, in publishing and inventorizing it. But it was not only that donation, which is already some time ago, it was also the way how you accompanied our work on this exhibition and how you supported it from the very first moment that we shared this idea with you. And it was in such a positive and incredibly warm spirit, which we really have rarely experienced. So somehow this positive spirit that you feel in Girard's work must have still been alive in your father and you, and we're really happy, and we feel really privileged to have been able to work with you on that. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I would also like to thank our global sponsor, Herman Miller, namely Ben Watson, for supporting the exhibition financially, but also with a lot of research, a lot of resources from the Herman Miller archives. You probably know, and it is also explained in detail in the exhibition, that Girard was the creative director of Herman Miller for many years, so there is a professional relationship of Girard and Herman Miller that lasted for very long, and we're happy that Herman Miller today is trying to communicate that Girard legacy again by being part of the exhibition as a sponsor, and also not only with the Herman Miller brand, but also with the brand Maharam, which has become part of the Herman Miller Corporation. And we are also happy that Herman Miller and Maharam will especially work with us on bringing the exhibition to the United States after the initial presentation here at the Vitra Design Museum. So the exhibition will be shown from next year onwards in several American museums. Then I would like to thank the exhibition designers Raw Edges, Shai Alkali and Yael Meyer from London. They did a great job. You will see it in the museum. I think Raw Edges is really, it's a young design practice that has a great capability of working with colors and fabrics and patterns. And of course, this was what we were looking for that exhibition. You couldn't have done it that way without the sensibility for what was also important in Girard's work. So thank you very much for that collaboration. And last not least, I would like to thank Jochen Eisenbrand, the exhibition curator, for this wonderful exhibition, and also the whole team that supported Jochen, his assistants Sarah Wirth and Ebua Itondo, who are somewhere here in the audience, and all the other members of the Vitra Design Museum team. thanks a lot. And now, Jochen, you may say a few words about the exhibition concept.
Yes, I would like to start out by just briefly speaking about this wonderful archive that we keep again, because that proved to be a real cornucopia of items that we could draw from for this exhibition, and that have been accessioned for the past 3 to 4 years. And it contains about 5,000 drawings, architecture and design drawings, more than 7,000 photographs of Girard's designs, his whole press archive, countless textile samples, and so many objects that he designed, furniture, small decorative items, even small sculptures, and which is a wonderful testimony to this enormous creative output of this one person. It was a real treat in the preparation of this exhibition to always say, okay, now we reserve another few hours and go down in the vaults and just pull the drawers and keep looking at things and keep selecting for this exhibition, which was really the main challenge to select in this case because of this enormous variety of materials. I think it's important to note that there's also other archives that have been made more accessible over the last years that are important for Girard as ours. The Cooper Hewitt National Design Museum was given textiles by Girard in the late 1960s, and they have quite well accessioned this archive over the last year, actually, made a lot of it accessible. The Annapolis Museum of Art that keeps all the correspondence to the Miller House, one of Girard's most important interior design projects, has put this collection online now. And then, of course, there's the Museum of International Folk Art, where Girard gave his wonderful collection of folk art in the late 1970s. This museum has been the main lender for this exhibition, and we are extremely grateful for this wonderful loan from them. Maybe a few words about the very interesting biography of Girard, because I think that's also not so well known up to now. He had an American-Italian background. He grew up in New York, he was born in New York and then grew up in Florence. His mother was American, his father Italian, of Italian-French descent. And I think this multicultural background contributed to his interest in cultures from all over the world. In the first section of the exhibition, we're therefore looking at this early biography of Girard, because there was much to discover in his early career that is less known up to, say, the 1950s, before his great career begins. And we're looking at his years in Florence, in London, where he studied architecture. He's a studied architect. He actually worked in Paris for a while, in Stockholm. Some people detect some Swedish or Scandinavian influences in his work. He contributed to the exhibition in Barcelona, the World Exhibition in '29. I was a great admirer of Mies van der Rohe's pavilion there. Moved to New York in '32, worked there for 5 years, then on to Michigan, where he got in touch with the good design movement and made friends with the Eames and Saarinen and other contemporaries of American design. And then in '53 moved on to Santa Fe. And so we're really trying to tell this story also a bit geographically, and the influence of the different places where he lived, the influence those had on his work. Matteo already alluded to it. There's two fields in which Girard really excelled amongst all the many disciplines he worked in. It was textile and interior design. In the mid-1930s, there's one of the few articles published by him in which he actually talks about his ideas of interior design, and he calls his concept of interior design the concept of aesthetic functionalism. So he says an interior shouldn't only be functional in the strict sense, but it also needs to speak to the senses, to our memory. It should give our eyes, when we move through it, something to hold on to, and spaces should even tell stories. He wants to create narrative spaces that open windows onto other worlds. And in his early years in the 1930s, he does that often by creating murals. And you can see an influence there, I think, of the Italian Renaissance that stayed with him for all his career. So he creates large-scale paintings on the wall with fantasy landscapes, fantasy architecture. And later on, throughout his work, this moves more into objects, movable objects. He had a great interest in the theater, and he compared interior design actually to theatrical display. He spoke about moving props in the interior. Many of the private interiors that he designed were therefore not once designed and completed interior, but ongoing processes. Again, most famous, the Miller House, where he consulted the Millers over the course of 20 years, and the house kept changing from year to year, and also had different interiors between the seasons. His own house, or his own homes, one has to say, were always kind of laboratories for his own design work. He once, in an interview that we're showing, he speaks of, we're guinea pigs in a guinea pig house. And his apartment in New York, his house in Grosse Pointe in Michigan, and his house in Santa Fe were much published in newspapers at the time as pioneering interior designs. And the house in Santa Fe particularly, one can see many of the parts of it then reappearing in other projects, or actually inspiring other projects of his. Whereas these private interiors were changing projects, kept changing. The restaurants he designed, La Fonda del Sol or L'Étoile, were projects he designed once as a complete world of its own, where he designed really everything from the spatial sequence of these restaurants down to the finest, smallest detail. And this attention to detail was something that contemporary designers also very much appreciated, such as the Eames. The other field he really excelled in was textile design. In his early interiors in the 30s, there were already textiles designed by him to be used, but only in small series or just for this one occasion. And his big break was in 1951 when he was commissioned or hired by Herman Miller, the furniture manufacturer, to become the director of the textile department of this company, and from then on be responsible for all the textiles used and designed, for all the color schemes. So that also many, not only his own furniture, but also the furniture of Nelson and Eames, if upholstered, were often upholstered using textiles by Girard. These textiles, many of them seem so timeless, I would dare to say, because in these textiles, especially, one can see the influence of folk art. Folk art was one of his great interests that he was pursuing from early on, already as a youngster, because of this multicultural background he had and his great interest in different cultures and in traveling. And it was for him not only a nostalgic impetus, but he said he wanted to keep folk art as a nourishment for the creative spirit of the past. And I think his work is a wonderful example how that could inspire truly new designs. And the textiles that this meant using patterns or refining patterns that he found in the folk art, using colors, or using design techniques that he found being used in folk art and appropriating that for himself. Folk art he started collecting in the 1930s, and it became ever more important throughout his career. He used folk art pieces as decorative elements in his interior design projects. He used it, as I said, as inspiration, also because of this idea of folk art being very much about repetition and variation. You have certain themes that are recurrent, but are always newly interpreted by different folk artists. In Girard's case, it was this one designer who kept reinterpreting and newly varying certain patterns or certain motives. And this is what Matteo talked about, connection. So we were actually with Raw Edges speaking about this. You go through the exhibition and you see so many connections between the different projects where certain things suddenly reappear, but just in a different mode, a different size, or in a different variation. And I think that makes it very rich and actually an exhibition to come back to quite a few times. Another reason why he was so fascinated by folk art was, I think, the fact that in these communities where folk art was created, was that there it was really very much still part of daily life. Everyone was creating something, making something, be it preparing food or actually creating pieces, whereas he, in a highly technological society in the USA, was, as a designer, of course, also doing a lot for himself, but as a designer, mostly working only upon commissions. And lastly, I think it's important that there was also a humanist agenda in collecting this folk art, because he wanted to show that across cultural, political boundaries, there are many themes in folk art that you see recurring from country to country. We spoke about the universal common bond, a very idealistic idea, but I think one that still totally holds true today. I also want to express my deep gratitude to the Girard family that has been hosting me in my visits in Santa Fe, and also been lending. Marshall Girard has been lending some wonderful pieces from the Girard residence to the exhibition, and of course, in general, all the wonderful support you gave us. And I also want to thank personally Raw Edges, because it was such a wonderful experience, and I think you've really shown that there's so much to learn for designers today from Girard's work, taking cues from his work to create something new. Although you already mentioned the catalog, I want to do so again, because I think it was a wonderful occasion here to really have a designer that not so much has been published on yet in comparison to the Eames or to the Nelsons. Not someone where you had to think what new angle can we take, but someone where you really had a lot of new ground to cover. And I hope we've succeeded doing that with the catalog. It does contain a not complete, but a list of works, and I really hope that this will also inspire further scholars to do further research on Girard. Thank you.
So thank you all for being here today. We're really excited as the family to be able to see this come into fruition after many years of hoping and wishing and thinking and planning. For me, above and beyond all of these wonderful and true things that both Matteo and Jochen spoke to, was that he was our grandfather. And he was an incredibly kind, humorous, generous, just playful man. And we grew up in a house 5 minutes from him and spent much time with him and my grandmother in really just a normal family way. And people often asked us, how has he inspired you, or how has your work been inspired by his? And it was really just the spirit that you can see in all of his work, the spirit of joy, the spirit of humanity, and seeing that across all the cultures of the world and really drawing a thread through that is what has influenced us the most, and we're just so excited to see this.
Yeah, I would like to build on exactly what Alicia was saying. Just it was such a prolific career and went in so many different directions and covered such vast territory. I mean, there was nothing that wasn't inspiring. He could be anywhere and see anything and use it as a tool to create new ideas or new interpretations. So it was a really difficult process to figure out how you tell that story and how you include so much. And it's just been an incredible pleasure working with Vitra, and also the help of Herman Miller and Maharam and all of these people that kept the faith and have persisted in the importance of this story, because it is such an educational gift to the world, and we are honored to be here. So thank everyone. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot. We're really happy that you will be the ones who are doing the guided tour in English later.
Sure.
So I think, well, I hope that still some German colleagues will join the German tour, because this is, of course, unique, but with Jochen it's also unique. And so I can recommend both. You said the show includes a lot. It does, in fact, include it's the exhibition with the most exhibits we ever did. This is for sure.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think we were guessing how many. It depends on how we count the little folk art items, but it
something like 700, 800 pieces altogether, and we usually have maybe 300 to 400. So it's really
quite a lot of things to see. Yes. And I would also like to draw your attention, a part of the catalog, of course, and the guided tours to the event program, which you find in the leaflet. We are inviting a lot of guests over the course of the next month during the exhibition to speak about themes like color, like patterns, like the ornament. A lot of young designers, also more established designers like Patricia Occhiola will be here speaking about their work. And of course, tonight we'll have the opening talk of the exhibition with Michael Maharam, who is here in the audience, and Todd Oldham, who did another beautiful book about Girard's work. So Michael and Todd Oldham will be discussing with Jochen Eisenbrand about Girard's work and his legacy today. So I would warmly recommend to also join this talk tonight. It is before the opening that will start at 7 o'clock. Well, now, are there any questions that you would like to ask in public? This is the moment. You can do it. There is a microphone if you want. Vivian? Yes, eine Dame, die. It's working.
I'm very impressed by friends and family. And I wanted to know why the father and the mother of Alexander decided to move to Firenze, Florence, from New York. That's my first question. And second one, do you know how was the first meeting between Alexander, the grandfather, and the Eames family, and Herman Miller, and Herman and Irwin, their brother?
No.
No
relation.
Okay.
Thank you.
I think that the first question of the French roots is still quite a mystery for us. Even he was a very forward-thinking person, and oftentimes didn't discuss so much the past. And I think when he was born in New York, but at 1 year old, moved back to Florence and was raised between Florence and London, and then sort of never looked back or talked about the family history. And it's still quite a mystery to even my father. We've done some research. His younger brother, Giancarlo Girard, stayed in Florence and stayed with the mother for his entire life and held the key to many of these questions. And we tried to ask. He was an incredible artist and eccentric that it cannot be forgotten as well. But it's still sort of a mystery to us what the exact.
I think possibly had to do with her husband, who was our great-grandfather, was an antiquarian, and the interest of the art that exists in Florence and the long history of that being there as a very rich source of buying and selling antiques. Yeah.
And then the second question, there's also multiple truths to that. But Detrola, I think Charles met my grandfather at Detrola Radio in Detroit first, and then they built the relationship from there. Is that what you know? Or?
Yeah, that's the anecdote that
Yeah.
we told several times, that Charles Eames came to Detrola, a radio manufacturer that Girard was working for, designing radios when he was living in Michigan. And Charles Eames probably came there because he was working for a plywood manufacturer or representing a plywood manufacturer, say. And they wanted to offer plywood to the radio manufacturer to be used for the cases. And then he went to the desk of Girard, and Girard was not there, but left a note, "Oh, I see they don't need me here," because he saw someone was doing good work. And then there's another nice story told by Girard himself in an interview where he says that when they finally met then, he was showing Eames the plywood furniture he had designed. And then Eames said, "Oh, I've I've done the same, I worked with the same material, and then Eames brought his plywood furniture, and then Girard knew he didn't have to pursue that anymore because there was someone better at that. And I think with the Florentine roots, I think that's really an important issue, that they were dealing with antiques and designing, actually also furniture, and quite successful at it. We found some advertisements, testimony to the fact that they were exhibiting at World's Fairs in 1900, 1902, 04, all within Europe.
Yeah, we still have a few of the pieces that they designed, and they are exquisite pieces, just completely, you would never think that they were from the same family, but in fact they were, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Any other questions? Nochmal hier vorne.
I'm also a French journalist, and actually I would like to ask a question to Raw Ages. I would like to know how you work on this exhibition. I mean, there is a lot of pieces, a lot of different scales and materials. And my second question is, did you know Alexander Girard works, and what did you learn about from his work?
Stay.
Hello.
People can see you.
For the first question, I mean, Jochen said it's the first time so many items in that exhibition. It's definitely out. It's the first time we actually designed an exhibition. So it was everything was new to us. We've never done it before, so it was learning, exciting. So I think the main challenge for the first question is when you design an exhibition, it's not about you as a designer, it's about him, the protagonist of the exhibition. So it was really what to take from his work and how to display it, and not really recreating the way he did it, in a contemporary way in Germany in 2016. So if at the beginning of the process we always try to invent ideas, not only like, hang on, we have a designer here, let's look what he did, let's adapt it to this museum. So that was something about working on together with Jochen and the team of Girard was quite helpful with lots of sketches. And for the second question, I mean, I think learning from his work is what people say already, the connection. So you can see how it takes influence from one era to another. So he's starting to create dolls that has moving hands. So you have this hinge connection as a technical element. But you can see it coming back again and again as a graphic element at the later stage. And for me as a designer myself, it's quite inspiring to see how idea always stay in his mind and come later. Textile pattern or color combination. Fascinated by folk. You can see the costume in the exhibition on the items. You can see how this influences the famous dolls, which for the second question, that's of course the most famous the dolls and the buttons and the patterns. And then through the process, through the research, you learn a lot about their design that you do.
Any other questions? No? Okay. Shai and Yael will also be in the exhibition, so if you have anything to ask them directly, they will be probably happy to answer. So now at 3 o'clock, the English guided tour starts at the entrance of the museum, and then 20 minutes later with Jochen at the same place. Thanks a lot. Have a nice evening.
Thank you.